What started as a simple lick became a bond between worlds. Asterisk. The crash had been sudden, violent, and loud. Jack woke up with blood on his forehead and smoke all around him. His ship was broken, twisted like a crushed can. He unbuckled himself and stumbled out into thick green jungle. His head was spinning and his vision was blurry. He had no idea where he was, but he knew one thing: he was not on Earth anymore. Strange, bird-like creatures flew above the trees. The air was heavy, humid, and smelled like flowers mixed with metal. Jack tried to send a distress signal, but his comms were dead. He was alone, tired, and injured. With every step, his leg hurt more. After walking for hours, he finally collapsed near a riverbank. That's when he saw her. At first, he thought he was hallucinating. She had pale blue skin, long silver hair, and bright glowing eyes. Her body was tall, slender, with markings like soft tattoos. She tilted her head at him like a curious animal. Jack tried to speak, but only a groan came out. Then, the alien girl slowly walked toward him. She knelt beside him and looked at his leg. Jack was scared, but she didn't hurt him. Instead, she took out a small leaf and pressed it against his wound. The leaf dissolved like warm water, and the pain faded a little. He was too weak to ask questions. Then, without a word, she leaned close, and gently, she licked his cheek. It wasn't fast or aggressive. It was slow, warm, and strangely soft. Jack froze in shock. He blinked at her as she pulled back and just stared at him. Then she nodded, stood up, and motioned for him to follow. He sat there, confused and a little amused. Did she just lick me? He whispered to himself. In human culture, that would have been weird, rude, maybe even funny. But she didn't laugh. She looked serious, calm. But serious, Jack limped after her. Not knowing what else to do, she led him through the jungle. Deeper and deeper. After a while, they reached a small village made of tree-like huts and glowing stones. Other aliens looked at Jack with wide eyes. Some whispered, others backed away. One older alien narrowed his eyes and looked at Jack's cheek. He said something in a language Jack didn't understand, then turned to the girl and spoke sharply. She replied with a short but firm sentence. Whatever she said, it made the elder pause, then walk away silently. Jack was given food, strange fruit, and warm broth. He sat near the fire, still trying to understand what had just happened. The alien girl sat across from him, staring quietly. He wanted to ask her name, but she only blinked and tilted her head again. "Do you even understand me?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and gently touched the same spot on his cheek where she had licked him, then pointed at her own chest. Jack raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" he asked. Suddenly, one of the male aliens stood up, angry. He shouted something and pointed at Jack, then pointed at the girl. Jack could tell he was not happy about something. The girl stood up, her posture proud, and said something firm back. The male backed off, but not happily. Jack felt tension in the air. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. Something about that lick had changed everything. Later that night, Jack tried to rest. He laid on a soft mat in one of their huts. The girl sat outside the entrance, like a silent guard. He couldn't sleep. His mind kept going back to that strange moment, the lick. Why had she done it? What did it mean in her culture? Was it a greeting? A warning? Something else? He had no answers. But deep inside, he knew one thing. That lick wasn't just random. It had meaning. And whatever that meaning was, it had already begun to change his life forever. The jungle didn't sleep at night. Strange sounds echoed through the trees' chirps. Growls, clicks, and hissing winds. Jack lay awake on the soft mat. Staring at the wooden ceiling, he turned his head and saw her again. The alien girl sat cross-legged outside the hut, watching the shadows move. She didn't blink much, didn't make a sound. Only her glowing eyes showed that she was still alert. Still awake, still guarding him. Jack didn't understand her language, her people, or her customs. But something in her silence felt louder than any words. She had licked his face, helped him walk, fed him, and now protected him, like something precious. He didn't know if it was kindness or something else. He wanted to believe it was kindness, but something deeper inside whispered that there was more. When the twin suns rose in the sky, painting the trees gold and blue, Jack stepped out of the hut. The girl stood beside him right away, like a shadow that belonged to him now. Villagers watched with careful eyes. Some of them looked nervous, others curious, and a few angry. The same elder from before appeared, holding a wooden staff carved with glowing marks. He walked up to Jack slowly, raised one long finger, and touched Jack's cheek, the same spot where she had licked him. Then the elder's eyes narrowed as he turned and walked away without a word. Jack felt a chill in his chest, whatever that lick meant. It had power here. It wasn't small, and it wasn't silly. It meant something to them, something big. The alien girl led Jack into the forest again. She didn't speak, but her movements were clear. She'd point at a plant and offer it to him. She'd touch his arm when danger was near. She even pushed him down once when a massive flying beast soared above them. It didn't attack, just hovered for a moment, then left. Jack breathed hard, heart pounding. The girl just smiled calmly, like it was normal, like she had seen this 100 times before. At midday, they stopped near a lake. Jack knelt to drink from the clear water. She crouched beside him, watching closely. Suddenly, she reached forward and touched his hand. She pulled his fingers gently and pointed at his wrist. There, faint glowing lines had appeared, blue symbols that pulsed like slow heartbeats. Jack's eyes widened. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. The girl touched the same spot on her own arm. Her markings were brighter, more alive. Then she pointed at him, then herself. Then she touched her tongue and tapped her chest. He understood part of it now. The lick had started something. It wasn't just a mark. It was a link. He stood up, shaken but curious. Was he changing? Was this some kind of connection between them? A bond? A ritual? A mistake? He didn't know what he was becoming, but he knew he wasn't the same human who crashed here that night. When they returned to the village, things were different. The air felt heavier, like eyes pressed on his skin. A group of alien men stood in a circle. Blocking their path, one of them stepped forward and shouted something harsh. The girl stepped in front of Jack. Blocking him, the man shouted again, pointing at Jack and then at the girl's chest. The tension cut like a knife. Suddenly, the girl hissed, not in fear, but in warning. Her eyes burned blue. Her fingers curled like claws. The others stepped back slightly. But they didn't leave. Then the elder appeared again. Striking the ground with his staff, everyone went silent. The elder spoke in a deep voice. Slow and clear, he pointed at Jack, then at the stars, then at the girl. Then he said something with finality. Everyone bowed their heads, even the angry ones. The girl turned to Jack and gave a slow, strange smile. Then, for the first time, she reached out and touched his chest where his heart beat. Jack felt warmth spread through him like fire and light. The symbols on his wrist glowed brighter, pulsing in rhythm with hers. He looked into her eyes and knew he wasn't just a visitor anymore. He had been chosen, claimed, bound. He didn't know what that truly meant, but something inside told him. This wasn't just about survival now. It was about fate, and fate had already wrapped around him like a vine that would never let go. The sky cracked with thunder. Though there were no clouds, Jack stood on the edge of the glowing cliff, staring down at the old shipwreck below. The alien girl Luma was behind him, breathing slowly, her eyes never leaving his back. He had followed her here without knowing why. She had touched his wrist that morning. then pointed toward the forest path. He didn't ask questions anymore. Not after what his arm had started doing. The mark from her lick still pulsed faintly on his cheek, but now something new had appeared. Lines, symbols, glowing softly under his skin like written fire. They didn't hurt, but they felt alive, and worse. They reacted to her when Luma walked closer. His veins lit brighter. When she touched him, the markings shifted. It was like his body had started speaking her language without him. Suddenly, Luma stepped beside him and pointed to the shipwreck down below. It was an old Earth model torn in half, rusted, forgotten. Jack squinted, his heart skipping. "That's a human transport," he whispered. He didn't recognize the number, but he recognized the structure. "What's a Terran ship doing here, Luma?" Didn't answer, but her face turned grim. She motioned for him to follow. Then began climbing down the cliff using narrow, glowing vines. Jack followed carefully, the path steep and slippery. Every time he stumbled, her hand was there, catching him, holding him. It was like she could sense his weakness before he even lost balance. When they reached the broken ship, the silence grew heavy inside. Twisted metal groaned softly. Vines had grown through the walls, feeding on old energy leaks. Jack stepped over broken crates and turned a corner, then stopped. There were bones. Human bones, old and dry, resting beside empty uniforms and faded ID cards. Jack's throat tightened. "They never made it home," he whispered, kneeling beside one body. A patch on the arm said Terra Medical. Luma crouched beside him, her fingers brushing the bones with surprising gentleness. She took something from the neck of the corpse, silver tag, and placed it in Jack's hand. Then she looked up at him and said a word he didn't understand, but the way she said it made his heart sink. "Family," Jack guessed quietly. He stood up and looked at her. "Why did you bring me here?" Luma pointed at the mark on his wrist again. Then back to the wall of the ship. There, hidden beneath mold and dirt, were carving symbols that looked just like the ones glowing on his arm. He rubbed the dust away slowly, and as he did, the wall lit up. A humming sound filled the room, and a panel slid open, revealing a small crystal cube pulsing with soft light. Jack reached for it, but Luma stopped him. She said something firm and serious. Then she stepped forward, licked his hand again once. Slow, deep, and nodded when Jack touched the cube. It glowed brightly. Images flashed inside his mind. A star map, names of planets, coordinates, most of them labeled in an alien language. But one stood out in English. Home Earth, for the one who carries her mark. Jack stumbled backward, shocked. This wasn't just a random act. This was planned. The lick wasn't just a greeting or an emotion, it was a key. Luma looked at him, her face unreadable. "You chose me," Jack said slowly. "Not because you needed help, but because I was the only one who could open this." She nodded. Once, then the ship suddenly shook. A loud boom came from outside, followed by alien voices shouting in the distance. Jack looked out through a crack and saw dark figures approaching through the jungle. Black armor, red lights, long rifles. Not villagers, these were soldiers. And they were coming fast. Luma pulled him by the hand and pointed at a tunnel behind the wreck. She didn't need to speak. He followed without hesitation as they ran. Jack clutched the crystal cube tightly. It felt warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. Like it was alive, they moved through tunnels lit by ancient roots and glowing fungus. Every step deeper felt like diving into a mystery too large for one man to carry. But Luma held his hand the whole time. And Jack knew whatever the truth was, he was now part of it. He didn't know why she had chosen him. He didn't know how. The mark on his skin could unlock human tech buried on an alien world. But one thing was clear now. The lick meant something powerful, something binding. And someone didn't want him to understand its true meaning. Not yet, not ever. He was bleeding, not from a wound, but from something inside. Jack sat on the damp cave floor, breathing hard, his eyes fixed on the crystal cube still glowing in his hands. Luma crouched beside him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. Neither of them spoke, not for a long time. Not after what they had just seen. The tunnel had led them deep underground. Beneath the jungle, beneath the wreck, beneath even the roots of the glowing trees. They had stumbled into a chamber, untouched by time, ancient, smooth, alive. The walls hummed with energy, and when Jack stepped close, they responded to the mark on his arm. Symbols glowed, doors opened, and secrets began to whisper. A giant stone stood in the center, carved with two figures, one human, one alien. They stood hand in hand, eyes glowing, joined by a beam of light connecting their hearts. And below it, in old Earth script, barely readable, were the words, Unity. Through bond, power through trust, Jack had stood there frozen. It wasn't just about survival anymore. He was part of something old, something planned. Long before he was born, before she was born, Luma stepped forward and placed her palm on the center of the stone. A soft wind stirred inside the sealed chamber, and the floor began to shift. A spiral opened in the center, revealing another room filled with light and humming machines. They walked inside, and Jack's mouth fell open. It wasn't alien tech. It was human, old, rusted, but real screens, wires, a control chair, and at the center, a recording device blinked slowly, waiting to be touched. Jack stepped forward, placed his hand on it. The room went quiet. Then a voice filled the air. Old, tired, human. This is Captain Mara Elgin of Terra Ship Helix. Day 829 stranded. Jack's heart nearly stopped. That name, he'd read it in school history. Helix was one of the first deep space missions that disappeared without a trace. The voice continued. We were betrayed, it said. We came to form a peace bond with the alien kind, but not all of them wanted peace. They turned on us, destroyed half the crew, but one of them, the Queen's daughter, saved us. Jack turned slowly toward Luma. She stood still, watching him. She didn't move, didn't blink. Captain Mara's voice cracked. She bonded with one of us. Through their ancient rite, the lick, Jack whispered under his breath. It wasn't random. The recording said, it's a vow, a soul link. The one who is marked becomes part of their line, part of their power. Jack's legs gave out, and he sat down, overwhelmed. All this time, he thought he had been helping her, protecting her, but from the start, she had been choosing him, not by accident, by design. The recording ended with a warning. They will come for her, and if you carry her mark, they will come for you too, because when the two are united, no force can control them. Be ready. Jack's hands trembled as he looked up at Luma. So that's what you did, he said quietly. You made me part of this. She nodded slowly, then reached forward and touched his chest again. The mark on his cheek glowed brightly, and the floor beneath them pulsed with energy. Another door opened, this one leading upward, toward light, but behind them. Deep growls echoed from the tunnels. The hunters were close again, and this time they wouldn't stop with warnings. Luma grabbed his hand and pulled him through the rising door. They emerged on a ridge high above the jungle. The world wide and burning under the twin suns. Below them, warships were landing, their shadows long and deadly. Jack looked down, then at her. We run, he said. Luma shook her head. She pointed to the ridge, to a tower in the distance, hidden by the fog. Then she touched his heart again and whispered, Awaken. His chest burned, but not in pain. Something inside him shifted, like a door opening within his own blood. He gasped and dropped to his knees. His vision flashed blue, gold, silver, and for a moment, he heard everything. The wind, the trees, even her thoughts. She wasn't scared. She was ready. And now, so was he. The lick wasn't just a mark. It was a key, and now that the lock had turned, there was no going back. Jack screamed, not from pain, but from something deeper. His vision turned white, then dark, then full of stars spinning in slow motion. He felt the forest disappear around him, felt his bones shift, his heartbeat stretch, his breath move like wind through wires. He wasn't on the cliff anymore. He was standing in a place made of memory and sound. Floating symbols hovered around him, some human, some not, and in the center of it all was a glowing shape, pulsing like a heart inside. The shape? He saw her Luma. She stood tall, wrapped in royal fabric, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. She raised her hand toward him, but her mouth didn't move. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You carry the mark," she said. "You carry me." Jack tried to speak, but no sound came out. He reached forward, and his own hand flickered, becoming light. He wasn't just seeing this, he was becoming part of it. Then suddenly, the mark on his cheek burned hot, and he felt. He gasped and sat up, covered in sweat. Back on the ground, near the ridge, Luma was beside him, watching quietly. Her hand was on his chest, where the glowing pattern now moved like a living tattoo. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He understood now. The mark wasn't just for show. It was a living code, an ancient seal. It linked him to her, yes, but it also unlocked something inside him. He could feel it, his senses sharper, his skin humming with hidden energy. Even the wind seemed to speak differently to him now. Luma stood and walked to the edge of the ridge. Below them, the enemy soldiers moved like ants, scanning, marching, preparing. They weren't just here to capture her. They were preparing to erase the bond before it fully awakened, because if it did, nothing could stop it. Jack rose and joined her. She looked at him with soft, serious eyes. Then she took both his hands and pressed them against her cheeks. Her skin was warm, trembling slightly. Then she spoke slowly, carefully. In his language, "You are changing," she said. Jack nodded. "I know." She placed her forehead against his. "I chose you, not because you are strong, not because you saved me, but because you felt empty." Jack's breath caught in his throat. No one had ever seen that part of him, not even him, but somehow she did. And instead of running from it, she gave him purpose, gave him the mark, far above. A red flare streaked through the sky. Enemy signal. They had found their trail again. Luma stepped back, her face suddenly serious. "We don't run now," she whispered. "You are ready." Jack reached for his rifle butt. Something stopped him. He looked down at his arm, where the mark had spread, glowing through his veins. He didn't need a weapon. He was the weapon now. He held out his hand, and without thinking, the energy gathered in his palm. A soft sphere of light, floating like a quiet flame. He looked at Luma, shocked, but she only smiled. "That is only the beginning," she said. Together, they moved through the trees like shadows. The jungle responded to them. The vines shifted. The leaves whispered. The roots parted. The bond had changed more than just him. It had reawakened. Something in the land itself, at the edge of a ruined temple. They stopped. Luma pointed at the carved gate. "This is where it must happen," she said. "What?" Jack asked. She turned to him slowly. "Your final mark," she said. Jack stepped closer to the gate. He raised his hand, but it wouldn't open. Not yet. Luma walked forward and gently licked his other cheek. The energy rushed through him again, stronger, brighter, deeper. The gate responded instantly, sliding open with a sound like thunder underwater. Inside, light flooded the room, and something huge waited in the center. An ancient machine, humming softly, waiting for its bonded pilot. Jack stepped inside. Behind him, Luma watched with pride and sadness. She knew what this meant. He was no longer just marked. He was activated. The meaning of the mark was clear. Now it wasn't just love or loyalty, it was destiny. The sky cracked open like a wound. Massive ships pushed through the clouds, dark and heavy, like floating mountains. They moved slow, but each one carried death beneath its steel skin. Jack looked up from the ancient temple doorway, his heart beating faster. They had come not to search this time, but to take, to conquer, to end everything. Luma stepped beside him, her face calm. But her hands trembled, her eyes reflected the ships above, as if she had seen them before, in her nightmares. He didn't ask if she knew them. He could already tell they were the ones who wanted her back. Not out of love, not out of justice, but because she had something they feared inside the temple. The machine Jack had stepped into earlier now stood quiet, waiting for his choice. It had accepted him, yes, but it hadn't moved, not yet. It would respond only when the bond between them was complete, only when both of them chose the same fate. The jungle below roared with the noise of troops being deployed. Tall figures in black armor, masks hiding their faces, weapons glowing. Red in their hands, they moved with purpose, not a single one looking around. They weren't here to explore. They were here to retrieve the lost heir and kill her mate. Jack turned to Luma. If we stay, we die. She looked at him with steady eyes. If we run, others die. He hated how calm her voice was. But he also understood why she wasn't afraid of death. She was afraid of being taken. She walked into the center of the temple's platform and raised both her hands. The ground beneath her lit up with old alien runes, glowing softly in response. To her presence, Jack watched as her silver hair began to float, weightless like starlight underwater. Her body glowed faintly, and her voice echoed, not from her lips, but from the air around her. I am the daughter of a broken throne. She said, I am not property. I am not their puppet. I choose my bond. I choose him. The air pulsed, and the mark on Jack's body lit up again, brighter than ever before. He took a step toward her. Unable to resist the pull, the machine behind him hummed again. Now sensing the final connection, he stepped back inside it, and the moment he did, something clicked. Metal wrapped around him, not in a painful way, but like armor welcoming an old friend. The machine lit up, lights dancing across its surface. Luma stepped beside it, pressing her palm against the core, together. They activated the heart of something ancient, something long asleep, below. The enemy commander stared up at the glowing temple. He removed his helmet, revealing silver eyes like Luma's but colder. Sharper, dead. She's awakened it. He growled. A soldier beside him asked, should we retreat? No, the commander replied. Burn the whole forest if we must. Just bring her to me. Fire fell from the sky. Explosions rocked the ground. Trees lit like torches. The jungle screamed. Animals ran. The very soil cracked, and through it all, Jack stood inside the awakened machine, now fully alive. Its arms moved, its voice whispered inside his mind. Protect the bond. He raised the machine's arm, and a shield of light formed around the temple. Missiles struck it, but bounced off, exploding harmlessly in the sky. Luma walked to the edge of the platform and stared down at the troops below. She raised one hand, and the vines of the forest responded, whipping forward. Tearing through enemy lines, they weren't just bonded to each other, they were bonded to the world. Nature moved for her. Technology moved for him, and together. They moved as one. More ships descended, surrounding the area. The enemy thought they had them cornered, but they didn't understand what had truly awakened. This was not a rescue mission anymore. This was the beginning of a war. Jack looked down at the enemy soldiers and felt no fear. He looked at Luma, her eyes burning like twin moons, and he knew what she wanted to say before she said it. They can't take what's already mine, she whispered. Then she reached out and touched the glowing armor that covered Jack's chest. The machine let out a deep sound, like thunder speaking, and then it stepped forward. One massive foot shaking the earth. The bond was no longer a symbol. It was now a weapon, and Jack was ready to use it. The battlefield was quiet, but only for a moment. The flames had burned low. The sky was painted with smoke, and ash floated down like snow. The once green jungle now lay broken and gray. And in the middle of it all stood Jack, inside the ancient machine, barely breathing, barely standing, his armor cracked, glowing with fading light. The enemy had fallen back, what remained of their forces scattered like frightened dogs. But their leader hadn't run. Vorak stood alone, his silver eyes locked on Luma. Blood dripped from a wound across his face, yet his blade stayed firm in his hand. "This isn't over," he said. Voice low and shaking, Luma stepped forward. Weak but still graceful, she no longer held energy in her hands, her power spent. Her eyes were full of sadness, not for herself, but for what she had to do next. "You were once my brother," she said quietly. "You could have chosen peace." Vorak laughed, bitter and empty. "There was never peace for us, only control. You bonded with a human," he spat. "You threw away your bloodline for a pet." Jack opened the machine's core and stepped out slowly, armor burning away into dust. He didn't answer the insult. He didn't need to. Luma looked at Jack and smiled. Tired but true, she walked to him, every step filled with meaning. Then, in front of the enemy, in front of the dead in the trees and the fire, she licked his face one final time. Slowly, gently, like a whisper between souls. And Jack closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. The mark on his cheek glowed one last time, and then vanished, replaced by something deeper. Something permanent. Luma pressed her forehead against his, and this time she spoke in a voice clear and strong. "I choose you forever." Vorak roared and charged forward with one last strike. But Luma didn't flinch. Jack moved like lightning. Grabbing the blade with his bare hand, it burned through his skin, but he didn't let go. He looked into Vorak's eyes and said softly, "She's not yours to take." With a final push, the sword shattered between his hands, the energy around them broke like glass. Vorak fell to his knees, defeated, not by weapons, not by power, but by something older than both. Choice. Jack stepped back and looked at Luma. He was bleeding, he was shaking, but he was smiling. She reached out and held his face. The jungle behind them began to breathe again. Slowly, green returning to the ash, flowers blooming from broken soil. The temple lights dimmed, like they had done what they were made to do. The bond was complete, not just a ritual, not just survival. It was something new, the beginning of a future no one had written yet. A story that belonged only to them. Days passed, and the sky turned blue again. The jungle healed, the villagers rebuilt, and Jack and Luma stayed by each other's side. They spoke now, more with words, but still with looks, with touches, with trust. No one questioned what they were. No one dared. One morning, Luma sat beside the river, brushing her silver hair as the wind danced. Jack joined her with a small smile, handing her a flower he found nearby. She took it, and instead of saying thank you, she leaned over and gave his cheek a soft lick again. Jack laughed, shaking his head. "Some things never change," he whispered, but she smiled and said, "No, they just mean more." And in the sky above them, the stars blinked quietly, watching two souls from two worlds who chose each other, not by law, not by force, but by a bond written in flesh, in spirit, in something no enemy could destroy. A bond that started with a single, unexpected lick and ended with everything changed forever.